Hi, I'm Lee Kelso, host of the Health Call Live Radio Hour. Glad that you're here to learn about a problem that the World Health Organization says is one of the biggest threats to global health, food security, and development today, and that is antibiotic resistant bacteria that can cause and are causing deaths all around the world. What are we doing about it and what can be done? We're going to talk today to the executive director of a private public partnership called CarbX to learn how they are playing a role in trying to bring new, more effective medications to market. So let's welcome Kevin Outerson. He is the executive director at CarbX, joining us from Boston University. Kevin, thanks for being here. Tell me about this concept that we're facing a huge global health catastrophe, and we just don't know it yet.
And so what we're talking about here is antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Antibiotics were great when they were introduced in the 30s and 40s. They dramatically improved our lives. But unlike almost any other type of drug, as soon as you start using these, they work less effectively because the bacteria change. Mm-hmm. And so we need to innovate not only for the things that are working today, but the things that will need to work tomorrow.
So give me an idea of how I'm contributing to the problem if I have a bottle of unused antibiotics sitting in my medicine chest.
Well, the bottle is pretty safe sitting in the chest, but depends what you do when you throw it out. Some people just flush it down the toilet and then it ends up in wastewater systems. That most wastewater systems aren't designed to eliminate the antibiotics. And so people have found if they test waters and streams all over the world, that they find all sorts of antibiotic residue, not just from the, people that dump pills in the sink or toilet, but also just from human use, and it gets excreted through the body and ends up in the system. So you should always only take the antibiotic that the doctor prescribed for you and for the precise amount of time that the doctor called it for. Taking them when you don't have a bacterial infection, when it's a virus, boy, that not only is a waste of money, it also could damage your body and also damage the environment.
So as I go to the doctor, and I know physicians sometimes feel pressure to prescribe. That's why I came, right? I feel like I need to leave the office with something. So if I'm pressing that doctor for an antibiotic, how am I contributing to the problem?
Some doctors are rated by their health insurer on how they did with the customer interactions, kind of like a Yelp review for doctors, And some doctors find that if they try to talk the patient into doing the right thing, you probably really don't need an antibiotic because what you have is probably a virus. Some of them have found that they end up getting 1-star Yelp reviews by the patient from the health insurer, which then punishes them financially. So let's listen to our doctors. Let's not demand antibiotics unless the physician thinks it's necessary. And please reward doctors for spending the extra time to explain something to you and talking back and forth with you to hear your concerns instead of just dinging them for not giving you what you thought you needed when you came in the door.
So the problem
there's a lot that each person can do.
So the problem is if I'm taking these antibiotics when I don't really need them, how is that making that microbe more resistant to the drug?
It's a numbers game. Every time you use an antibiotic, every time we produce more into the environment, it increases the chance that there'll be a mutation and the bacteria will become resistant to that drug, which will make it harder for that drug to work in the future for you or your child or your grandchild or a person 10,000 miles away. It also damages you. People don't understand this as well, haven't embraced this, but the science is clear. Taking antibiotic into your body does all sorts of other changes to your body. It can clear out not just the bad bacteria you're trying to kill, but other bacteria in your stomach and in your gut. And that can lead to other serious conditions and diseases. So it's good for the environment. It's good for the other people in your life. It's good for people around the world. It's also good for you. These are powerful drugs. Take them when you need them. Don't take them when you don't need them, because we need to save them for the most appropriate circumstances.
And I'll just add on to that the recommendation that you take your drugs all the way to completion of the course. Even though you might be feeling better, it's important that you complete that full course of those antibiotics, right? Because that's going to knock the bacteria out as opposed to letting it live inside your body and become adjusted to those antibiotics.
Yeah, I'll be a little more precise. Do what it is the physician tells you to do in this regard. We found, though, over the past 5 years that the original recommendations, take this antibiotic for 14 days or something, or 5 days, that those weren't really based on incredibly sound evidence. They were based on the early studies in the 1940s and 50s. As we've looked at it more carefully, and some very good studies have been run, they're coming back with recommendations that for some antibiotics, the period can be shorter. And that's going to change the number of days that are prescribed. So the advice is listen to what the doctor says and understand that it may be a shorter period of time or a different period of time than what you were used to as a child.
Good input. So these bacteria and other microbes are becoming resistant to the drugs that we have on hand. What kind of a problem are we seeing in hospitals and around the world with that?
I mean, can you imagine if aspirin stopped being effective because too many people had used it to prevent or cure a headache, right? And so penicillin, one of the most amazing drugs ever invented, doesn't work in many bacteria now because we've used it a lot. And so the result is that hospitals find that the drugs that they've used for many years, sometimes the inexpensive generics that have been great for decades, that they really know how to use and are very safe, that those are becoming less effective, which forces them to switch to newer, more expensive, less well understood drugs. If you're in a poorer part of the world, this could be life-threatening because that new drug may not be available yet. If in the United States, it's still life-threatening. 35,000 people estimated by the CDC to die from this in the U.S. Because it takes time to understand the diagnosis, which drug would be useful for the particular bacteria you have. And for a lot of patients in the U.S., they've gone too far before the right drug is presented to them. So it's a problem here, and it's an even bigger problem around the world.
And are we talking about any particular type of infection that can become deadly because these bacteria, or at least difficult to treat, because these bacteria are now accustomed to the drugs, or is it just all multiple systems all through the body?
The most serious ones are when it becomes a bloodstream infection and related when it becomes sepsis, when it's such a severe infection that your body's immune system reacts or even overreacts to the infection. But the original patient that was treated with penicillin way back when in England, he had injured himself. It was just a skin infection from a gardening wound, right? And that patient was made better by penicillin, but then they ran out of penicillin. They hadn't made much yet, and he died, right? So not that long ago, people could die from a gardening wound on the skin. As well as more serious things like serious urinary tract infections, bloodstream infections, and lung infections. So I'm afraid that it's all of the above, and it's mainly because bacteria. It's mainly because antibiotics have been working for most of our lives that we're unfamiliar with, what our grandparents and great grandparents had to live with.
So, yeah, that is a good awareness to have. That little cut or scrape isn't likely to kill you today, but it wasn't the case not all that long ago. So we saw about 63 new drugs come on the market between 1980 and 2000, 63 new antibiotics. But since then, what's happened?
Well, it's very difficult economically. Most of my work as a professor at Boston University, in addition to work at CarbX, has looked at what is broken about the market here. For cancer drugs, they're making billions of dollars. There's thousands of companies and thousands of compounds being tested. For antibiotics, if you make the most innovative, amazing antibiotic and bring it to market, the correct response is to use it as little as possible, to put it on the shelf, to save it only for the sickest patients who have the most resistant bacteria. So the most innovative things are not used except when absolutely necessary. And that's different from any other technology market in the world. Imagine if, my phone, if the most innovative phones you weren't allowed to use unless you could prove to a professional that you had to need that phone, I think we'd still be dealing with landline phones if that was the rule. So the structure of the system, which is good, let's save new antibiotics for the future, means that there's no sales of the new antibiotics for the present. And that's led to the famous bankruptcies of a lot of firms, small firms that are trying to bring antibiotics to the market.
I get it. So there's no financial incentive to bring out a drug that isn't going to be used or is only going to be used for 10 days to 2 weeks tops. Just not that kind of profit potential. So that's kind of where CarbX comes in. You are an accelerator, a public-private partnership. Tell me more about how that works and what you've achieved.
We are, sorry about that. We are entirely nonprofit. We're based out of Boston University. We're funded by 3 governments: the United States, BARDA is the agency within the U.S. that funds us, United Kingdom, and Germany, and then 2 foundations, the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation. Those are our 5 funders. We scour the planet for great science, great projects that are, maybe they just emerged from a university. They're still very early. They've never been near a human. They're just being tested right now in the Petri dish. And we scour the planet and look at everything, and then a very small percentage of those we fund, we give money to. And we're trying to take these ideas, translate them from the just barely out of the university stage until the time in which we have solid data in people, in humans, and able to turn that drug over to somebody else to develop it for the large clinical trials that are necessary to get FDA approval. So we're covering that valley of death. We funded 92 projects, $350 million expended so far in our first 5 years. We intend to go for at least the next decade. And our goal is to find promising, radically new, amazing antibiotics and move them along so that, our children and grandchildren will have options.
What would you give me an idea of what condition you would hope to prevent with an antibacterial vaccine?
One of the most effective is the pneumococcal vaccine that has been on the market now for several years. It reduces the incidence of that bacteria and greatly reduces the number of people who go into the doctor sick looking for antibiotics. So not only reducing the number of people who get sick with it, but also reducing the need for antibiotics. There are a number of conditions for which, if we had a vaccine, even for a really targeted population, it could be really effective. So think about people that are about to go into hospital for an elective surgery. Wouldn't it be great if there was a vaccine that you could take 2 weeks before your elective surgery that gave your body a super boost against all the sorts of bacteria that can be a problem when you have surgery? That would be excellent. So that's the type of thing we're thinking about. There are many other examples as well.
Yeah, that would be pretty fantastic, wouldn't it? Tell me about the role that the microbiome, the bacteria that lives inside us, plays. Listeners to this program know that it's something that I have a great interest in. We've covered it pretty intensely here. And in fact, fecal matter transplants are proving to be one of the most effective ways to treat some forms of bacterial infections. What work are you doing there?
CarbX supports several companies in this live biotherapeutic or fecal transplantation, all the groups that want to try to restore and enhance the human microbiome. As I said earlier, the reason why people don't understand that taking antibiotics also harms you if you don't need it is that it messes up your microbiome and it needs to be restored. There's also a lot of people who just exposure to antibiotics in the environment and previous exposures earlier in life, their microbiome is needing to be restored and repaired. And so we have multiple companies in our portfolio who are doing exactly that. The first generation were these, oral, actually fecal material that had been purified and put into a pill form. There's more other groups now that are doing more sophisticated, engineering specific types of strains, things that are cocktails of healthy bacteria that are not derived directly from fecal material, but instead have been designed to optimize the human microbiome. And we support many, and there's many others that are going forward. This is a radical, new area of science that really barely existed except in a few people's dreams 10 or 15 years ago. And I expect in the next decade, you'll see the approval of a number of therapies and even prevention in that space.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? How not all that long ago you're really kind of a nutcase if you talked about using gut bacteria to solve a problem. So yeah, we have come a long way. Is there an accomplishment that has hit the market yet that's come out of CarbX? Anything you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, it's the sort of stat that I don't know if your listeners will appreciate, but it's so hard to take a compound that looks promising in the lab and get it to the point in which it's actually been tested in people. There's a lot of things that kill bacteria in a lab, right? Nuclear radiation, steam, but it needs to also not kill the person. It's interesting, the combination, and so getting an amazing idea through to the point in which it's being tested in people is an amazing accomplishment. And I'm proud to say that for 9 products in the CarbX portfolio, we've progressed to the point of human testing. Now, after they graduate from CarbX, they still have several years of large-scale clinical trials to nail down the efficacy, how safe it is, and how effective it is in patients before FDA approval. We're not to that point yet on any of the therapeutics that we've supported. We've already been around for 5 years. This process takes 10 to 15 years from start to finish. But it's a great milestone to see amazing projects now beginning earliest stages of human testing.
The critics, the naysayers among us, will look at this discussion of the potential superbug that kills humanity as nothing but hype and dark news that everybody loves for the click value. Is that really a possibility? Is it likely that we will see something get out of control and cause a pretty broad disaster in our short lifetimes?
So I think it's very different than viruses. Bacteria are larger organisms. They're actually alive as opposed to a virus. They have much larger genomes. They evolve and mutate more slowly. So, will we have a zombie apocalypse from drug-resistant bacteria that emerges instantly overnight, shuts down the planet? No, probably not. But think about the ways that bacteria have greatly impacted human history in the past. It's grown more slowly, but it's had huge impact. Think of the Black Death, right? That's a bacteria. The plague is a bacteria. And while certainly we're not as worried about the plague today, if you've read your history, you know how it devastated, Europe for one, but really most of the world to the extent that we have records. And that's not the only one. Cholera was a constant scourge to humanity until we understood where it was coming from. And John Snow removed the pump handle from the water pump in London and understood the connection between drinking contaminated water and getting cholera. So this is the sort of thing that I don't think a zombie apocalypse comes tomorrow. But as antibiotic resistance progresses, more people will die. And things that you and I take for granted become more dangerous and less effective, like a hip replacement or cesarean section. Those are decisions that a doctor and a patient make let's replace your hip, let's do a C-section. If we didn't have antibiotics as the safety net, you probably would worry more about dying from an infection from those procedures. And cancer treatment, it many times suppresses the immune system. The second leading cause of death today for people with cancer is infection. If we didn't have the right antibacterials and for cancer antifungals to deal with these issues, cancer treatment becomes less effective, right? So this is more of a slow drip, an important drip, but a slow drip rather than a dramatic overnight COVID, takes over the world.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, we don't need any more doomsdays, do we?
Had enough of that. Well, Kevin, thank you for talking with us about drug-resistant bacteria and your work at CarbX to try and bring new products to the market that could save lives in the future.